Hello and welcome to Really Dicey. Today we have a good treat for you. Our longtime watchers will know that we're big fans of Dungeon Crawl Classics and Goodman games. What you might not know is we're also big fans of the Dying Earth. So this is a real treat for us. Today we have two gentlemen from the design team behind the upcoming Dying Earth book from Dungeon Crawl Classics. So, gentlemen, why don't you introduce yourselves?
My name is Marc Bruner. I'm a writer for Goodman Games, and I was the project lead on the Dying Earth project for Goodman Games. And I've been playing role-playing games since I was in the 80s when I was just in middle school, young kid playing AD&D, expert D&D, all those systems, and just have a lifelong, passion for it. So
my name's Terry Olson. I'm also a writer for Goodman Games, and I worked alongside Marc. I wrote a bunch of different things for the Dying Earth set, not as much as Marc did. He definitely did the lion's share, but there's a fair amount in there that's mine. Like Marc, I got started in RPGs very early. Holmes Blue Box in '78, and just sort of didn't look back and kept on playing. Thanks very much for having us. It's cool to be on here.
Not all of our viewers know what Dying Earth is. So could you briefly explain what the Dying Earth is and why is it so important? Why is it cool? Why should they play it?
Well, yeah. So what we've done is take the novels by Jack Vance, which are a series of books that were written over a few decades, between the 60s, 70s, and 80s, different stories, that set in this world at the Earth at the end of time, essentially. That when the sun is dying and there's very few people left, and I think there's only a few thousands of souls, inhabiting the world. And most of the Earth is wilderness, but it's kind of that it's decaying, and the grandeur of the old is sort of evident in all the ruins that are present now. And that setting is really great because it's a great storytelling, vehicle for the novels. You have these great characters like Kugel and Rialto, the magician, and they have these sort of these epic adventures, and there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun that a lot of like irony and fun that they that Jack Vance writes into the stories. What we were tasked with, and what we are trying to do, with this book, is bring that setting to the Dungeon Crawl Classics rule sets. And so, if you're familiar with Dungeon Crawl Classics, it's kind of a throwback, game system that has some modern mechanics, and it's got a lot of fun elements. And so, what we're really trying to do is give judges and players who want to have the experience of the Dying Earth in their Dungeon Crawl Classics game, give them the tools and the character classes and the artifacts and the patrons that are from the novels and our interpretation of them, because in many cases Jack Vance, a lot of his things are like a one-line monster, here's a keek, and it's up to us to sort of like interpret what that is and sort of apply our rule sets. And so we had a lot of fun with that. But really what we're trying to do is bring the Dying Earth to Dungeon Crawl Classics, and that's what the Kickstarter is about.
Cool. It's cool.
Yeah, one of the nice things about it too is you can either play completely in Dying Earth, or you can pick and choose things and put them in your DCC game. It doesn't need to be an all or nothing proposition if you're going to play DCC Dying Earth. But the system's a lot of fun. There's a lot of great classes, a lot of new rules. We're hoping people are going to like it as much as we do.
I mean, if you look at Dungeon Crawl Classics, it's clear that you guys took a lot of inspiration from Dying Earth. They're just like original D&D did.
Yeah.
And, Terry, go ahead. I'll let you.
Oh, I was just saying one of the interesting juxtapositions in it is the DCC Wizard is a huge favorite of a lot of people to play. And the Dying Earth Magician is very different because we have sort of rote spell casting. There's memorization that maybe older school players will be more familiar with than newer people. And one of the initial things we juggled around was, how do we make the magician as an attractive spellcaster as the DCC Wizard? And I think we did it. At least in playtest, people have a lot of fun playing the magician.
Yeah, and I think that you pointed out, but Dungeon Crawl Classics, what it's inheriting a lot is that the original sort of novels that is also inspired kind of the original RPGs, right? And Dying Earth is one of those, that Gary Gygax and it, was directly taking elements of Dying Earth and trying to shape Dungeons and Dragons when he was building it, and using sort of like Kugel as like a prototypical thief, and and so what we're trying to do is kind of, we started from that place with Dungeon Crawl Classics. Now we're sort of layering on what would it look like if the whole world was that setting. And Dungeon Crawl Classics also has a real rich history of, there's a lot of craziness that can happen in Dungeon Crawl Classics. You can suddenly be sent to a whole different plane of existence, or you're fighting a god at level 1, or and this fits right in, because it could be that you as a judge say, hey, I want to campaign with my regular group in the Dying Earth setting. That's what this is for too. You bring your regular characters in here, and then suddenly you have sort of like the craziness of being in a different place, in a different world, but one that's familiar to your players, because it goes all the way back. The lineage goes all the way back to the the origins of the games that we love. Yeah,
it is really kind of a twisted loop where the games come back to where they started.
Yeah,
it's almost like you're time traveling with the game designs.
And a lot of it is interesting, because when we're also trying to make sure we balance with not repeating what was done in with the original interpretations of it. So there's a lot of saying like, what would our the Ion Stones, and what is that? It's not like just the kind of a floating orb in the D&D sense. What is the sort of the Dungeon Crawl Classics version of that that's new and unique, and giving players some fun, that's different, but also again, tied to that original lineage.
I saw the YouTube video on Goodman Games, and one of the things you were mentioning is the glossary of all the words that Jack Vance came up with, like Archivalt, or the Visp, or bunches of other ones that I don't quite know how to pronounce.
That drove me nuts reading those books, because I'd come across one of those words and I'd look it up, and 2/3 of the time it wasn't a real word.
I know.
Right. Marc, please particularize, if you will.
Well, yeah, that was when I was first reading the books and just doing it for my own enjoyment. It was sort of that. It really put me in the kind of the mindset of when I was first encountering D&D and encountering all these like sort of strange words like charisma and dexterity. As a young kid, I'm like, wow, this is sort of like words that I don't hear anywhere else. But this is, as an adult, it's sort of on that Jack Vance level, where he's creating his own words. And so, when I was doing the project, what I started doing was creating a list, creating my own sort of lexicon, or my own grouping, the Vancian vocabulary, list. And I ended up with, I think, 405 words in my spreadsheet. And what I did, because those were words that I thought were, particularly either flavorful or had, some value in terms of trying to inform our writing, right? So we use that list as writers to say, your challenge today is to try to, incorporate, some of these words, some of these new words into your writing, so that we can try to get the Vancian flavor in there too. But I remember when I was going through that list, and I would be like, okay, I'm going to go to the OED and I'm going to look up every word, because there's got to be a source for, this word. But like you said, like a lot of them are just, they're neologisms, they're Vancian creations that he is just having fun with the wordplay, or he's like got this sort of like, you may have like a similar sort of association to a similar word in the past, but it's not, he's using it in a new way, but it's not, and he's spelling it a little differently. So he's clearly got this sort of mastery of the language that he's either, playing the word games, or he's just having fun inventing this stuff. And I really enjoyed that aspect of just the research and saying, okay, where's the tracing, where's the etymology for all this?
One thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, Matt. I was just going to build off what Marc said. One thing that was fun, and I guess I should definitely say, besides Marc and myself, we had Bob Brinkman and Julian Burnett, two other really talented writers that added a lot of content and a lot of great stuff. And the four of us, one of the things that was funny, even though we had this huge list, there were words that we gravitated towards. And actually, there was a moratorium or two on some of the words, because we all started using them, like mooncalf. Everyone wanted to use mooncalf. And at one point, Marc brought the hammer down. He's like, no one uses mooncalf anymore. We have too many mooncalves.
That's great.
One other thing I wanted to quickly touch on or ask, you've gone to great lengths to talk about the magic in the world and And I think one of the books in the Kickstarter is just about magic. Could you talk a little bit about the non-magic classes? Because I know Jack Vance had a lot of characters like Kujal and Liam the Wayfarer and people who weren't magicians or who didn't have access to that. Could you talk a little bit about those?
Sure. So there's 4 classes that are added to the sort of DCC repertoire for classes. Magician we talked a lot about. That's your Rialto. That's your Turgeon. The Wayfarer is the Kugel class. It's sort of this thief-like rogue that has this sort of luck mechanic that we're trying to mimic what's Kugel's sort of ups and downs in the novels quite a bit, because he would often go through highs and lows and often at the the expense of other people that he was encountering in the stories. It's oftentimes like their luck would be directly affected by his own sort of the vacillations that affected him throughout. And it was never that he was like ever on has an easy life or anything like that. He was always the consequence of his own actions sort of dealing into these troubles. And so the Wayfarer has a luck mechanic that is both really powerful because, and if you're familiar with DCC, the luck mechanic is kind of one of the unique things about that, in that you can spend luck in order to affect dice rolls, and luck is one of these sort of, most classes have it as a limited resource, and it can also be used as a reward by judges. But some classes like the Thief and the Halfling regain luck, and the Wayfarer is very similar to that, where they can regain luck over time. But the Wayfarer tends to spend luck really big. But when he spends luck, or when people spend luck around him, there's a mechanic that's built in to say, what are the consequences of that? Because, from a storytelling element, what we're trying to do is create those story narratives in the campaign. And it's not all about combat. It's about, okay, I'm about to make this great roll. I need one more point of luck. I'm going to make that. When here comes the Wayfarer, to kind of steal it away from you. And suddenly that's a nice storytelling moment when you thought something was going to work, and here comes, the Wayfarer, and it's in something as a consequence of you spending luck and, thinking that you're on the high, you're now suddenly having to deal with, the fact that Kugel's around, and dealing with. So
that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So many times in the playtest, what would happen is, people would spend luck without there'd be little things like, oh, I want to make sure I make this save, so I'm going to spend 2 luck, 1s or 2s of luck spending without much consequence of the Wayfarer being with them. But then comes the big spend, the huge spell burn towards the end of the adventure, where everyone just pumps it out, and inevitably that's when all of a sudden the Wayfarer comes into play. And I won't give away the mechanics too much, but there's a lot of laughter and maybe some disappointment.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, so aside from the Wayfarer, the other 2 classes are the Witch. We were also trying to identify sort of those personalities within Vance's writing about what really makes a character. And I think the Magician and the Wayfarer are pretty easy to tie to the narrative. The Witch is one that's pervasive in Jack Vance's stories, right? The witches are, a lot of the early novels, they have the Bacchanalia and the Saturnalia of those, the witch is involved in the stories. They're always sort of cast as this sort of outsider, or maybe even evil presence, but more typically like an outsider presence, or somebody who's acting in their own interest. And that's what the witch is, essentially is a magical class that gets its, or draws its power from pacts with entities, mostly entities from the subworld or demonic entities. And so that's a class that is trying to take that interpretation of, well, sometimes there's not magic in the sense of you memorize a spell and you learn it and you maybe spend centuries refining sort of your technique. It comes from this sort of more darker place, right? And that's kind of what we try to do with the witch. So we try to give it its own flavor too, in terms of what it is and how it draws from magic. The last class is the Vat thing. So obviously in the early stories, the creation of life is kind of an element, and that's kind of one of the quests of Turgeon, trying to go to Panaloom and try to figure out, teach me how to make these life creations, because up till then all of his things have been failures. Well, the Vat thing is kind of taking that story and saying, okay, what if these failures, some of them did crawl out of their vats and became sort of autonomous, right? So they also have this sort of tie to their creator, and that's the patron mechanic works really well for that. But they're also flawed creations for the most part. So we're trying to, say these things are engineered, they're magically created. So there's some advantage to that, but typically that's offset somewhat by, the flaws that are told in the stories. In some cases they have weird deformities or sort of like things that cause them to have hardships throughout their life, whether they can only eat pap because they don't have teeth, or something like that. So again, sort of like taking those things that are story but making it into character elements. So that's the last class that we added from the books.
One of our VAT thing pre-gens had no skull and had an exposed brain, and so he would wear a very foppish hat to protect his brain.
For his head. That's great. Now, do you create those with like random tables and stuff?
Yeah,
yeah,
like DCC, we wanted to use the the 0 level character creation mechanics and sort of because that's a familiar and a fun aspect of DCC. A lot of people really like that. So one of the things that you can be as a result of your sort of 0 level rolls is a VAT thing, and if you are, then you roll on the the VAT thing flaw table as part of your when you're created, essentially. And then that things like so many of the classes, just like so many of the characters in the novels, they have a magical ability, and that's true for bad things too, because they are wizardly creations. And in the novels, several of them have sort of reach out and ask to be taught magic, essentially. And so that's part of this as well. There's a lot of magic in not just the magicians, but also the witch and the bad things, even the Wayfarer, because Kugel tries to cast spells, he's just not very good at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The good old misplaced pervulsion.
Yes, and I love the names of the spells. It's like Fandol's third.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we had fun with that too, because another thing that we wanted to bring is sort of a unique flavor to these spells, not only for the name and then sort of what that means, but the idea that these spells originated with somebody, and that Fandel created this version of it. Well, if you have depending on what copy you have, maybe you have Fandel's original copy, and he has his own sort of marginalia that give you a bonus when you're casting a spell. So there's actually a mechanic that we have that's similar to the mercurial magic mechanic, if I'm familiar with that from DCC, where each spell sort of has a unique casting. Well, we wanted it sort of a provenance is what it's called in the DCC Dying Earth system, where maybe the spell has a creator, an original creator, and there's this idea that the version you have, because magic is very unique, and it's it's hard to find in some ways, and wizards and magicians are very jealous of spells, but this version is like Fandel's third draft of it or something like that, and what does that mean in terms of when you cast it, which is kind of so we tie it to, we have like it's similar to the mercurial magic. We have like a list of 100 spell creators, and what their effects are, which is a rule system that you can use in place of mercurial magic to give it that Dying Earth flavor.
Oh, I love that. That sounds great. Giving the magic a lineage.
Yeah, and the other kind of progression of that on the flip side is that what if the original creators are a little jealous, that you're using their spells, and so instead of just rolling a fumble, and getting a misfire, which has its own, you can have like a misfire. Well, now there's something that maybe there's a built-in trap in the spell that is from this creator, and what does that mean? So we had some fun creating those as well.
And you can even personalize your own spells if you want.
That's
so
right.
We have rules for that too.
Yeah, Terry wrote the a really neat addition, which is the kind of the quest for it idea in DCC, which is if there's something you want to achieve, you go and quest for it. It's not like you just get a +1 sword. Well, you have to go and figure out how to make a magic sword, and maybe there's like patrons that you have to go and appease or do things for. Well, similarly, we wanted to say, well, what does it mean to make your own spell? And so in the Dying Earth companion, again, element that you could lift into your own DCC game, but creating your own spell is a kind of a neat quest for a thing for wizards or magicians or whoever you are that's doing a magic class.
And you can even modify a spell, so like one classic example, if you guys are familiar with the DCC magic missile spell, there's one result where you throw just one big missile for a lot of damage. And I've seen many people surrounded by like 10 baddies get that result. And they're just like, oh, man, you know, if I only rolled higher or lower, I could throw out all these missiles. So if you were so inclined, you could alter that result of the spell so that it threw out multiple missiles instead of one, and you put your own spin on it.
It sounds like everything was great, but what was your favorite part of working on this set of books, the Dying Earth?
I mean, I'll have to say we had a great team, and just the chance to work with Terry, Julian, and Bob. It was a really collaborative group. The fact that all of us loved the novels and loved the source material, and we also are, you know, obviously big fans of Dungeon Crawl Classics. We had a writing process that was really collaborative, you know, and I just really enjoyed having a group do this, because I think if I was working in isolation, or if any of us were working in isolation, you know, not having that sort of feedback and that sort of, you know, sharing ideas, it would have been a diminished product, you know, and it would have been certainly a singular focus of one vision. And just, it feels like it has the imprint of all of us, but it's not like you can tell who's writing what section. You know, I think we did a good job of really trying to keep it, you know, the style, you know, as a group style. And I think that, but the fun was creating all that and working with, you know, these great writers.
Yeah, I have to echo that. I mean, the first thing that popped into my mind when you asked the question was writing with the guys. That was sort of it. We had a Google Plus environment, rest in peace Google Plus, where we you know, we would all sort of post our ideas, and everyone would sort of jump on and offer feedback. But one thing that was different about this project than I would say other projects for DCC, at least that I've been involved in as a co-writer, was this is the first one where we were really cognizant of the feel of the writing and what the writing would evoke, you know. So like Marc, you know, had the glossography that he mentioned that we, you know, would pull words from, but we really did have a conscious intent to make all of the entries entertaining in some way. There had to be some snark or some tongue-in-cheek or some humor, you know. So, you know, any monster, any magic item, you should find something that makes you chuckle, you know, and if you don't, then we blew it there. But that was certainly what we tried to do. You know, we tried to make it fun to read and sort of evoke that feel of reading the fiction.
Well, that sounds great. I'm really looking forward to this. So before I let you go, is there anything else you want to say that we didn't touch on?
Well, the Kickstarter launches tomorrow, or today, I guess.
Right. So that would be the 24th.
Yes, it's gonna launch on Thursday, June 24th. And the information to, you know, get notified of when it launches is going to be on the Goodman Games website. You know, there'll be also a lot of activity during the Kickstarter. So we're planning on having some Twitch shows, you know, to kind of go over the, you know, details of the mechanics. There's gonna be a playthrough on Thursday night to launch the Kickstarter. There's gonna be a countdown, you know, Twitch show at the end, and various sort of shows throughout. You know, we're trying to keep involved and keep the fan community involved. So that's just for folks that are watching out for the Kickstarter. You know, also watch out for some of those events if they want to get updates on, you know, concurrent with the Kickstarter. We'll have those as well.
Yeah, already we've written a lot of fun updates for the Kickstarter, you know, so you'll get a lot of inside looks on a lot more detail on the classes. You know, we'll pull out some excerpts from the books for the updates, and then give you some funny stories about things that happened during the process.
Yeah, and if we hit all our stretch goals, we're going to have it'll be essentially a fourth book for the Kickstarter backers in new material. That there was so much that we just couldn't fit in, because we wanted to keep it, you know, at least something that would, you know, be the publisher, you know, would be able to not reject it outright. but essentially, you know, a lot of the Kickstarter goals are, what are those things that, you know, we didn't have but are still from the novels that we want to create. And so so I think that's another thing, is that if you back it and we get to those stretch goals, the backers are going to get essentially a force supplement filled with additional content, along the same lines.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for coming on. This has been a blast. I wish you all the best luck in your future endeavors. And to our viewers, I know we didn't go into the specifics of what's in the Kickstarter, but the links will be in the description. Go and check it out. You will absolutely love it. So like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.